Hello, my name's Elizabeth Baker. I'm a storyteller. My story today is all about the very first Christmas. So, make yourselves comfortable and get ready for a tale to take you away. The innkeeper rattled his bag of money and felt very sorry for himself. To be fair, it wasn't really his fault. How could he know how it was all going to turn out? But now his wife was very cross, and that was never a good thing. It had all started with the Romans. It always did start with the Romans. Ever since they'd taken control of the country, there'd been trouble. But now the Emperor, Caesar Augustus, had decided he was going to raise taxes. And to do that, he needed to know how many people he had under him. And to do that, he was going to have a census, a great count. The Romans declared that every man had to go back to the place where he was descended from, and he must take his wife, his family with him. And so the innkeeper found that his small town of Bethlehem was soon heaving with people, all of them descended from the house of David, all of them looking for somewhere to stay. At first, the innkeeper was rather pleased. He had more people staying and more business than he'd seen in a very long time. But soon there were too many people. He had people staying in every corner of his inn. He even had people staying on the flat roof. And by the end of that particular night, he'd been opening the door and saying, "Sorry, no room, off you go," more times than he could remember. It was getting late when there was a knock on the door, and the innkeeper was feeling particularly grumpy. He opened the door and there was a man, and he said, "Sorry, no room," and he was trying to shut the door when the man put his foot in it and looked at him anxiously and said, "Please, you're the last inn we've tried. We have nowhere to stay, and we've come on a long journey from Nazareth, and my wife is expecting a baby." "Well," thought the innkeeper, "that's not my fault. You should have been better organised if your wife was expecting a baby." But he didn't say that. He just said, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't help you." He was about to turn away when maybe it was the look of desperation in the man's eyes, or maybe it was the woman behind him. He could see the bulge of her tummy under her robes, and she looked at the man and said, "Joseph, it's fine. Don't worry, we'll find somewhere." And the man had turned and looked at her and said, "Mary, how can it be fine? I was given one job, to look after you and the child, and I've failed." The innkeeper will never know what made him change his mind, but he looked at that young couple and he said, "Listen, I haven't got any room, but I have got a stable carved into the rock out the back here, and well, it's not perfect, but I can give you some fresh straw and some bedding, and my wife will do you some food." The man looked uncertain, and the innkeeper said, "Well, it's up to you. Take it or leave it." And the woman said, "No, we'll take it. Thank you for your kindness." The innkeeper led them round the back where the stable was, and as he lit it with candles and lanterns, he could see how unsuitable it was. It was dark and the rock was cold, and he moved some of the animals out and he put down some fresh straw, and then he went back to the inn to find some bedding, and his wife did make them some food, and when he left them, the woman was slowly falling asleep and the man was fussing. To be honest, the innkeeper didn't think anything more about it. By the time he went to bed that night, he was shattered. He had been waiting on so many people that he just wanted to put his head on a pillow and go to sleep. So when he was woken in the middle of the night with a loud banging on the door, well, it's fair to say he was feeling pretty cross. He opened the door and there was the man, wild-eyed and looking very, very pale. And he said, "You need to help me. My wife, her child, it's coming now. Please, I don't know what to do." The innkeeper knew when a man was losing it, and he said, "It's okay. Don't panic. Go back, I'll raise my wife. She's been present when so many women from this town have given birth. She'll come and help. Go on. He woke his wife, and she was immediately all full of bustle. She knew exactly what she was doing. She sent her husband to get hot water, and she grabbed some clean bedding, and she went round to the stable, and the innkeeper followed her. The man was really fussing, and the woman looked remarkably calm for a woman who was about to give birth to a baby. And the innkeeper's wife ushered them out and said, "This is no place for men, out you go." Whilst they waited outside, the man, who the innkeeper learned was called Joseph, paced up and down, and he kept shaking his head and saying, This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I was supposed to care for them. The angel said." The innkeeper wasn't sure at all what the man was going on about, but he said to him, "Don't worry, it'll all be fine." And in a few moments, they heard a baby cry, and the man rushed in and rushed to his wife's side, and he just kept stroking her hair and saying, "I'm so sorry, I failed you and the child." And the woman was saying, "No, Joseph, I think this was how it was meant to be." When the baby cried again, it felt like something happened in the sky up above, almost like a whole host of people cheered. And yet, really, the innkeeper couldn't see anything. What he could tell, though, was that there was a star burning very, very brightly, almost as if its shaft of starlight was coming down onto the stable. The innkeeper's wife was busy cleaning things up, and the innkeeper looked at the child, and he was beautiful. He'd seen many babies, but this one, just a gorgeous tiny baby that the woman had wrapped tightly in some of the blankets that the innkeeper's wife had given her. And the innkeeper said, "You've got a canny little lad there. What are you calling him?" And the woman said, "Jesus. His name's going to be Jesus." There was a noise outside, and when the innkeeper went to look, standing were shepherds. Now, the shepherds never came down from the hills, and certainly not in the middle of the night. There's no way they would normally leave their sheep. There were wolves and jackals, and they ran the risk of losing them. But there were these shepherds standing at the door, peering in, and the innkeeper, without knowing what he was doing, let them in, and his wife didn't look happy at all. She said, Oh, there's a newborn baby in here, and you smell of the outdoors and of the sheep. What are you doing?" And the woman said, No, let them in. All are welcome this evening." The shepherds shuffled in, and they looked a bit anxious and a bit embarrassed, and they peered at the baby and they said, "Is it true, missus, what the angel said up on the hill? Is he really born to save the world? Is he really the Son of God?" And the woman said, "I think he is, yes." The innkeeper's wife looked at the innkeeper, and the pair of them shook their heads. And when the shepherds left, they followed them out, and the innkeeper's wife said, "What did you say? What's this talk about angels and Son of God and saving the world?" And the shepherds beamed. They beamed like they'd been filled with the light of that star, and they said, "We were up on the hills. We were just bedding down, and suddenly the whole sky was full of angels, and they told us. They told us we were to go and pay our respects to a King of Kings born to save the world. That God had sent a little bit of himself down to earth, and that we'd find a baby in your stable." All night there were visitors. The innkeeper was shattered. And the following morning, well, the man, Joseph, he found somewhere else for them to stay, and they were gone. But the whole town was full of the story. The innkeeper was never sure how they all found out. Maybe the shepherds had told people before they'd gone back up to the hills, or maybe everybody had been filled with a little bit of that starlight. What he did know was that he'd taken money from the man, from Joseph, for staying the night in the stable. He hadn't really meant to keep it. The next morning he'd meant to give him it back, but there'd been such a hullabaloo that he hadn't really remembered, and now everybody knew. Everybody knew that it was his stable that that baby had been born in, and everybody knew that he'd taken the money. And his wife was furious. She said she would never be able to hold her head up high in the street again. The innkeeper wasn't terribly sure what had happened last night in his stable. What he did know was that he felt different, and he also knew that he needed to do something with that money. It had been quite an extraordinary evening.